Welcome to a crash course on the book of Daniel. And so today's video is going to be a little bit different from what I normally do, but I wanted to record this for you guys as I just finished a deep dive study of the book of Daniel, and I want to give you an overview and a big picture of the prophecy that is in this book, because I believe it will greatly help you in your study of end times as well as your study of the book of Revelation, right? And another reason that we should want to study this as believers. So why? So that we can have answers for the world. Because I believe as we're going deeper and deeper into end times and Bible prophecy is being unfolded, there are going to be wars. There's going to be shift in different nations, different political leaders. And we want to have answers for those who ask. We want to be prepared for what's coming. Right? And so in Daniel, in the last chapter, after Daniel receives all this revelation, the angel tells him, Daniel, seal up this book until the end times. So this book is actually sealed up and is written really for the end time church, for the end times, for the days that we are living in, and we can have revelation of what's coming. And really, Daniel, he said, I don't understand a lot of what you're saying. Daniel could not fully understand all these things concerning the end times, but I believe that with the help of the Holy Spirit, we can catch a glimpse of what's coming and we can fit the pieces together, right? And we can be well prepared for the days ahead. And so just before we jump into it, just so you know, the book of Daniel is not chronological. So the first 6 chapters are really narrative or stories, and then chapters 7 through 12 are really the visions and the prophecies. And so I'm going to go a little faster through the first chapters that are narrative, but I want to encourage you guys to stick around till the end, because we're really going to start to unpack a lot of this powerful end time prophecy. And so I want to encourage you guys as well, if you enjoy learning about the Bible and Bible prophecy, to hit the subscribe button before we jump right in. Okay, so starting with chapter 1, we're just going to briefly touch on this, but just to set the stage, chapter 1 starts with the Jews being taken into captivity into Babylon under King Nebuchadnezzar. And so they are taking these young Hebrew boys, right? And they're basically wanting to train them up to be good Babylonians. They're trying to change them to be pagan. They try to change their names, change their identities. And really the main thing that I want to hit on out of this chapter is in chapter 1 is verse 8, where it says that Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself. So they're taken into this wicked culture, right? And that is, how many of you know, that's just like our culture today in the end times. We are living in a perverse and wicked culture, right? But just like Daniel, I believe that this is a word for the end time church, that Daniel purposed in his heart not to defile himself. So we as believers in this time, we need to purpose in our heart to make up our mind that no matter what comes, no matter what's going on in the world, I am not going to defile myself. I'm not going to be conformed to the patterns of this world, but I'm going to be renewed in the spirit of my mind. I'm going to obey the Lord. I'm going to live holy. I'm going to live set apart. And with that comes a great reward, because we see that Daniel, it says that God granted Daniel unusual favor, intelligence, even this gift of interpretation, that he was able to interpret dreams and visions. And then it goes on to say that they found these Hebrew boys who had not defiled themselves 10 times better, 10 times wiser than all these other guys. And so I believe that what do we need to get out of chapter 1 is that we have to make a decision in this end time as believers not to defile ourselves with the wickedness of this world, but to live holy and set apart. And that when we do, God is going to give us favor. He's going to give us wisdom, and we're going to be 10 times better than those of the world. So chapter 2, we see the first major piece of prophecy given. So in this chapter, King Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, and he's looking for someone to tell him what his dream is as well as its interpretation. So he calls in the Chaldeans, his magicians, his sorcerers, these people with occult powers, and they are not able to tell the king his dream. But Daniel, who serves the living God, he hears about this and he prays to God, and God reveals to Daniel what the dream is as well well as its interpretation. And so he goes and he tells that to the king. And so basically what the dream was is this metallic statue. And so this statue was really representative of the coming Gentile empires, these major empires. And so let's break down what they were. So firstly, it talks about the head of gold, which is representative of the kingdom of Babylon and, King Nebuchadnezzar. And so then the next one, which is basically talking about the kingdom that's going to come after Babylon, is Medo-Persia. And this is represented by the chest and the arms of silver, meaning this empire wouldn't be as strong as Babylon. And so then the next one is the belly and the thighs of bronze, which represents the Grecian Empire. And then it has the iron legs. So these legs made out of iron. And so we know that iron is a very, very strong metal, right? And so these iron legs represent the Roman Empire, which was, as we know, a very, very strong empire. And then it talks about the feet, and it says the feet are like iron and clay mixed together with these 10 toes. These 10 toes, which that is representative of the final kingdom at the end of the age. So all those other ones we've already seen happen, right? But these feet, this last and final empire has not yet come. And so I want to kind of spell this out for you as we're getting into this book of Daniel, because we're going to see a lot more about these empires, but you have to understand that in between the Roman Empire, which is those iron legs, and these feet with the 10 toes, which is this 10 nation confederacy empire, whatever, at the end of the age, there's a huge gap of like 2,000 years, right? Because we haven't seen this last empire yet happen. Okay, and so what you have to understand is that the book of Daniel is a book concerning the Jews and the Jewish people and the nation of Israel, right? And so after the Roman Empire, during the Roman Empire, right, they destroyed Jerusalem, and the Jews were scattered all over the world. So the Jews were no longer a collective people. They didn't have their nation. So there's this huge pause in all these prophecies, because we saw after Jesus came, right, that God began to direct his attention to the Gentile world, right? And we've been living in the times of the Gentiles, the church age, where God is directing his attention to people other than the Jews, right? That he's building his church, people from every nation, tribe, tongue, and race. So there's this huge gap between the Roman Empire and this last empire that's going to come, that I believe is very soon at the end of this age. So there's like this 2,000 year gap where God is not dealing with the Jews right now. God is dealing with the Gentile world. So that's what I want you to understand when it comes to all these prophecies, and it gets deeper into this, that there is a gap between the Roman Empire and this last empire that is coming at the end of the age, which is coming very soon. And so that is basically the outline of Daniel chapter 2. And what's another interesting part of this is actually in verse 43. I thought this was interesting to point out, talking about this final empire, this Antichrist kingdom with these 10 kings. It says that they will combine with one another in the seed of men, basically saying they're going to mingle with the seed of men. And so you can take this and you can study it out for yourself. But I have thought it's very interesting. A lot of people believe that the mark of the beast in this final hour kingdom is actually could potentially alter human DNA, right? Because Jesus said, like it was in the days of Noah. And in the days of Noah, we saw, right, that these angels came down and mated with women, right? So human DNA was being altered. And so many people believe that this final kingdom, where it says that there will be mingling with the seed of men, that the mark of the beast potentially, it could be something to do with AI, could be something to do with, altering human DNA. And we don't know, but it's very interesting. But this final kingdom, this is the kingdom that the huge stone, which we know is Jesus Christ, he comes to crush this kingdom and set up an eternal kingdom, the kingdom of God, which will endure forever and ever. And we are going to be a part of that, right? We're going to be a part of that kingdom. And so that's really the vision of chapter 2. And as we get into later chapters, we're going to see these kingdoms spelled out even more in the pages ahead. So chapter 3, I'm briefly going to touch on. Many people know this chapter. It's the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and how they get thrown into this fiery furnace. And really, this chapter is also very prophetic. Basically, the king sets up this image of himself, right? And all the people are forced to worship this image, which we can see this is prophetic. It's a pre-type of what we see in the book of Revelation, that the Antichrist is going to set up this image of himself in the temple and going to force everyone to worship this image, right? And so what's so powerful about this story, even though, I believe in a pre-tribulation rapture, so I don't believe that we will be here to see the Antichrist image set up. But you can even think of this with the Antichrist spirit. And you can see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and their boldness to not bow to that spirit of Antichrist, the spirit that would, it's all about idolatry, right? Worshiping something other than God. And so we want to be like these Hebrew boys. They were bold. They were confident in the God that they served, that he was able to deliver them. And no matter what came in their nation, no matter what laws were passed, no matter what edicts were passed, right? They were not going to bow their knee to the world system, to this Babylonian wicked system, that even though they were living in Babylon, they were strong in their knowledge of God. And they said, we are not going to be conformed to this wicked culture. We are not going to bow. And we believe that God is going to deliver us. And that's exactly what happened. And it ended up turning many, they turned to God, right? The king was so amazed that they were not consumed in this fiery furnace that he began to glorify God. And I believe that's going to be our story in this final hour. As you don't bow your knee to the wickedness of the culture, I believe that God is going to show himself strong in your life, and that many people will stand in awe. Many people will stand in awe of the glory of God upon your life. Chapter 4, the main point of this chapter is that pride comes before the fall. God hates pride. And so many of you may know of this chapter. It's basically where King Nebuchadnezzar has another dream or vision, and he sees this great tree that is cut down. And Daniel comes to interpret the dream for him and basically tells him, King, unfortunately, that tree is you. God is about to cut you down because of his pride, right? He was boasting in himself and his own power, that he's the one that had raised up this awesome empire, basically glorifying himself, right? And that is an abomination to God. And so God gives him over to this animal-like mind, right? Where he crawls on the ground, whatever, for 7 years, and he's eating grass like an ox. And pretty humbling. And so he is so humbled. And as we know that at the end of those 7 years, after he's humbled, God restores to him his kingdom, and he becomes a worshiper of the one and only true God. And so how in this hour, we need to be so careful that we do not get lifted up in pride, right? But as we continue to humble ourselves under the mighty hand of God, we're going to be able to continue to see him do great and mighty things in our lives. So in chapter 5, we see that King Belshazzar is giving this feast, this great festival, and he is actually Nebuchadnezzar's grandson, and he's having this feast with these silver and gold vessels that had been stolen out of the temple in Jerusalem. And so he's having this pagan feast, and something wild happens. There's a hand that comes and begins to write on the wall this message that none of them could interpret. But Daniel had a great reputation of being a man that was able to basically interpret anything, that they knew that he has the Spirit of God in him, right? That there's something different about him. And it literally says that, the king says, but I personally have heard about you, Daniel, that you are able to give interpretations and solve difficult problems. I like that, because people, you and I as believers, people who carry the Spirit of God, we should have a reputation of people that have wisdom, that we have insight, and that we are able to solve difficult problems. This is a worldly king, the king of the greatest empire in the world at that time, saying, Daniel, I've heard about you, that you can solve my problems. And that's a powerful picture of how the church today, that we should be the ones with the answers. We should be the ones that have a reputation for having understanding and insight of what's going on in the world, right? And so Daniel goes on, and he's basically going to interpret this inscription for the king. And the king actually offers to give him these gifts and basically to pay him to give him the interpretation. And Daniel says, keep your gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else. However, I will read the inscription and give you the interpretation. And so, this reminds me of in Acts chapter 8, where the guy came and he tried to buy the power of God from Peter and John. And they said, may your money perish with you for thinking that you can buy the things of God, right? So these gifts that God had given Daniel, and whatever gifts that God has given us as the end time church, these things cannot be bought, right? But we are, as we have freely received, we're to freely give of wisdom, freely give of what God has shown unto us, right? And so he goes on and he gives them this interpretation. And he basically tells them first, Belshazzar, you knew what happened to Nebuchadnezzar. You knew how he had to be humbled, yet you have not humbled your heart before the living God. And so what I thought was interesting about this is it just goes to show that even though that was his grandfather and he knew what happened to him, every generation has to have their own revelation of God and make their own decision to humble themselves under the hand of God and to worship the one true God, right? Because Belshazzar had fallen a long way from Nebuchadnezzar and how he ended. And so he goes on to say what this inscription was. And basically what it means is that God has numbered your kingdom and put an end to it. So he's saying God is putting an end to your kingdom. And it says that you have been weighed on the scales and found deficient, and your kingdom has been divided and given over to the Medes and the Persians. And that same night, the Medes and the Persians literally invaded and killed King Belshazzar that same night. And so what's really interesting is if you are a fan of Bible prophecy and you want to learn more about this, literally in Isaiah, I believe it's chapter 44 and 45, it's prophesied exactly how the Medes and the Persians would take over Babylon. There was really no battle. They snuck in. They literally reverted or changed the direction of the Euphrates River. They came in on this riverbed and they literally took over Babylon that night, really with no fight. And so we see that is the end of the Babylonian Empire and the beginning of the Medo-Persian Empire, which we saw was the silver chest and arms of that metallic statue in chapter 2. Now, chapter 6 is a very important chapter for us to grab a hold of as the end time church. And I think a lot of Christians maybe wish they would have had a better handle in this chapter back in 2020. And you'll see why. And so basically in this chapter, this is under the Medo-Persian Empire. Daniel is serving under King Darius. And he, became very distinguished. He's very high up in the kingdom. And so, of course, these other guys, the commissioners and the satraps, they want to find some kind of reason to accuse Daniel, but he doesn't do anything wrong. He does everything perfect. So they come up with an idea to suggest to the king to sign this statute that anyone who prays to any god other than the king is going to be thrown into the lion's den. Because they knew that Daniel was a man that prayed to his God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so we'll go on to see that it says in verse 10, now when Daniel knew that the document was signed, so Daniel heard and he was well aware this statute, this document had been signed by the king, that if he prays to his God, he's going to be thrown into the lion's den. He knew, he was well aware. And it says, and he entered his house. Now in his roof chamber, he had windows open towards Jerusalem. So went into his house, windows are open. He's not trying to hide. And it says he continued kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks before his God as he had been doing previously. So there was a law, there was something passed in his nation that forbid him from doing what he normally did, right? His custom, his religious custom, which was to pray every day to his God. And so he knew it was signed and he ignored it. And it says that he prayed 3 times a day, just as he had been doing previously. Why is this important? You don't stop serving God, stop doing what you've always done, right? Because a leader in your nation tells you you can't do that, or you're going to have these consequences. And, in 2020, many people thought, okay, well, we don't have to go to church because the nation said that we shouldn't go to church for this amount of days and whatever. But I do wonder if Daniel would have been alive in 2020, I believe that he would have gone to the temple just as usual, even though he knew what was going on, right? He probably would have gone to the temple as usual, because it says here that even though the king made this edict, this statute, he kept on praying to his God. That is a boldness and a fire that he's not going to compromise no matter what comes in this wicked culture that he's in, right? He's going to keep serving God. He's going to keep trusting God. And we can see the reward that came, because he was thrown into the lion's den, but he remained untouched. God shut the mouths of these lions. That is totally supernatural. And it says that Daniel was taken up out of the den and no injury was found on him because he trusted in his God. Even in the face of impending danger, it looked like he was going to lose his life. And sometimes it may look like, wow, my life is on the line. But he trusted in his God. And God delivered him supernaturally. And it was an awesome sign and a wonder to the nation that he was living in. Now, chapter 7, we get into some very exciting end time prophecy. So in this chapter, Daniel has a vision of these 4 different beasts, which are basically very similar to the different parts of the statue that we saw in chapter 2. And so the first beast that he sees is a lion with eagle's wings, which is likened unto Nebuchadnezzar and the empire of Babylon. And then we see a bear that is raised up on one side with 3 ribs in its mouth. And so that is likened unto the empire of Medo-Persia, the one that came right after Babylon, right? And so why is it raised up on one side? Because Cyrus, who was Persian, was stronger than Darius the Mede. So the Persians really were the stronger of the two. And so it really ended up becoming the Persian Empire. So the bear is Medo-Persia. The 3 ribs in its mouth symbolize Babylon, Lydia, and Egypt, which are the 3 empires that they overtook. And so the next beast that he sees is this leopard with 4 wings and 4 heads. And so this is where it gets exciting. So this is representative of the Grecian Empire, or really, which we know who led that was Alexander the Great. So they liken Alexander the Great to this leopard with 4 wings. Why? Because of the swiftness of really how his empire took over, right? He conquered basically the entire known world in a very, very short period of time. And so, fun fact for you, they say that in Josephus's writings that he writes about how when Alexander the Great came to Jerusalem to overtake it, that the elders and the priests actually showed him in the writings of Daniel the prophet everything that was written about Alexander the Great, all this stuff, and there's more details as we go on about Alexander. They showed this to him, and he actually passed through Jerusalem and did not destroy it, and so he left it at is. So that's a fun fact. There's a lot written in this book about Alexander the Great that was all perfectly fulfilled. And then it talks about the 4 heads of this leopard, which we'll get more into in the coming chapters. And then it talks about the 4th beast after the leopard. So after the Grecian Empire is this 4th beast, which is likened unto the iron legs, which is the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire. And it has these iron teeth. And then it says that it has 10 horns. And so these 10 horns are similar to the 10 toes of the statue, right? So these 10 horns represent basically 10 kings at the end of the age that are going to come out of this 4th beast. Okay, so let me just break that down for you. So basically, in the interpretation, this is verse 24. It says, as for the 10 horns out of this kingdom, basically saying this Roman Empire. So meaning the same territory that was the Roman Empire back in the day, out of that same territory is going to come these 10 horns or these 10 kingdoms that will arise. And then it says, then another one will arise after them who will be different from the previous ones and will subdue 3 kings. So this can be confusing, but basically what it's saying is at the end of the age, there's going to be this revised Roman Empire that consists of 10 different kingdoms or 10 kings, 10 nations, which are the 10 horns, the 10 toes. And that's going to be at the end of the age. Same territory as the Roman Empire. And then it says one will come after them that will subdue 3 of the kings. So the Antichrist is going to rise up. He's going to be this little horn that rises up, which we're going to talk more about. And you can read that in verse 8. It says the little horn comes out and he basically subdues 3 of those nations. So 3 out of the 10 nations are going to be overtaken by this Antichrist that rises up during the tribulation. So why is this important? This is what we can be on the lookout for right now. At some point, these 10 nations or these 10 kings are going to rise up in that region. There's going to be 10 main powers. And so we may see that happen before the rapture, but it's also possible that right after the rapture, there could be some war that causes these 10 kings to rise up. So we don't know if we'll see that, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on. And so what else is interesting about this is for these 10 kingdoms within the Roman Empire to rise up, it would seem that Russia needs to fall first because Russia is a major power right now, but Russia is actually outside of this territory. So that's why I did a whole video on the Gog-Magog war that you can go check out. So the Gog-Magog war, which I believe could be on the horizon very soon, and we'll see what happens, but that's when Russia's going to be taken out. Right. And so it would seem that Russia is not going to be a major player, as well as America. America is not in Bible prophecy. So something's going to happen where America, Russia, these other major nations are not really going to be a major factor in this end of the age empire. And so what's interesting about this chapter as well is that Daniel has a vision of the Ancient of Days, which is God. And then it says in verse 13, he has a vision of the Son of Man, which is awesome. Let me read you this. This is verse 13. He says, I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man was coming. And he came up to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion, glory, and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and men of every language might serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which will not pass away, and his kingdom will not be destroyed. Hallelujah. So this is talking about when Jesus returns, that he is that great stone that's going to crush this last empire, right? This last beast. He's going to come and crush them, and he's going to set up his kingdom, which will never pass away, and it will have no end. And so then it says in verse 18, it says, the saints of the highest one will receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever and for all ages to come. So Jesus is going to give us, the saints, to reign over this kingdom for all ages to come. Whew, that's exciting. And then it goes on to say, I wanted to mention this as well. Okay, this is verse 21. It says that horn, talking about the Antichrist, that horn that rises up out of the 10 horns, that he was going to wage war on the saints and overpower them. And so we see that also basically says the exact same thing in Revelation 13, verse 7. And so, I obviously, if you've been following my channel, I believe in a pre-tribulation rapture. And one of the reasons that I do believe that the church will be raptured is because Jesus said, I will build my church and the gates of hell will not overcome it. So when he's talking to the church, he basically says the powers of hell cannot overcome the church. So that's why I believe the church is going to be taken out. Now, those who get saved during the tribulation, it says that God is going to give this Antichrist power to overcome them. So that's another reason it would seem to me that this is not talking about the church, but this is talking about tribulation saints, people that are getting saved during the tribulation. You know, in Revelation, it says they will be beheaded. They will most likely lose their lives, and they will be overpowered by the Antichrist. And so you can go on to read the rest of the chapter here. But the other main thing I wanted to point out, and we're going to see as we keep going in part 2, that the Antichrist, each chapter, it's going to narrow down more and more where he's going to come from. But in this chapter, we can see that he's definitely going to come out of some region within where the old Roman Empire was. He's going to be one of those 10 kings, right? He's going to come out from the 10 horns, those 10 kings that are going to occupy the region of the Roman Empire. So, and we're going to see in the coming chapters that it's going to narrow down even more, where we can see where this Antichrist figure is going to rise up out of. So I want to encourage you to stay tuned for part 2. We will finish up with chapters 8 through 12 in that one. And in the meantime, if you want to learn more about Daniel's 70 weeks, I actually already have recorded a video on that specific prophecy that I will link right here. And it will be a great foundation for you to understand before we jump into part 2 of the book of Daniel.